My name is Maren, and I was 34 the morning my own mother stood in a courtroom and asked a judge to strip me of the right to run my own life. She wore charcoal gray, the color she saves for funerals and important photographs. Her attorney had a gentle voice and a folder thick enough to prop open a door. Across the aisle, my sister wouldn't meet my eyes. The clerk called my case, I rose, and the whole room seemed to tilt toward me like a held breath. My mother already had a tissue balled in her fist. She believed she'd already won. What none of them knew was that 12 days earlier, I'd quietly stopped being the shattered widow they'd buried beside my husband. What I was about to hand that judge would take under a minute to read, and it would end everything they'd spent a month building. My mother asked a judge to call me unfit. She should have asked herself why I was smiling when I sat down. Welcome to another story from Quiet Reckonings, where the relatives who mistake a calm woman for a weak one always find out exactly what that calm was hiding. If a family has ever smiled through your grief while quietly counting what you'd inherited, stay a while. To understand the courtroom, you have to go back a month, to the afternoon of my husband Owen's funeral. I drove to my parents' house with a copy of his will on the passenger seat and grief where my ribs used to be. I wanted to tell them together as a family. Owen had left me everything he'd built with his own hands, 3 rental units on Larkspur Lane, and the cabin on Lake Westcott where we'd spent every anniversary. The side door of my parents' house always sticks, so I nudged it open with my shoulder and froze, because I could hear my mother's voice through the gap, and she wasn't grieving. She was organizing. The cabin would be perfect for Renata's kids, she said, the way you'd assign seating at a wedding. My sister answered fast and eager, and I heard my own name passed between them like a serving dish. They already knew, before I'd said a word, before the flowers on Owen's grave had wilted exactly what he'd left me, and they were dividing it. I stood there, hand on the doorframe, the will heavy on the car seat behind me, and understood I hadn't walked into a family. I'd walked into a negotiation, and I was the asset being carved up. Then my mother said the sentence I'd carry for a month like a stone in my shoe. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her. She always caves. My phone buzzed against my hip, loud in the quiet kitchen, and I stepped back off the porch before either of them could turn around. I didn't go in. I've spent 9 years as a hospice nurse, and the job teaches you one strange skill above all others. When a room is falling apart, you lower your voice. So I got quiet. I drove the long way home, 20 minutes of back road, feeling almost nothing yet. I didn't decide to fight in that car. I wasn't that clear-headed. What I decided was smaller and colder. I wouldn't tell them what I'd heard. Whatever they were building it on the belief that I didn't know it existed. That ignorance was the one asset I owned that they couldn't see. So I'd keep it hidden. I'd smile at the reception, hug the aunts, and let my mother go on believing her softest daughter was exactly as soft as she needed her to be. It felt like lying. It also felt, for the first time in a week, like standing on ground that wasn't moving. I still didn't know what they were truly after. I only knew I wouldn't hand it over. Let me tell you who we were, because it matters. I grew up the quiet one, the middle daughter who paid her own way through nursing school working night shifts. My sister Renata is 4 years older, always halfway into some scheme that needed just a little more money to work. Our mother, Vivian, has a gift. She can make wanting sound exactly like worry, and taking sound exactly like love. Owen saw through her before I ever did. He was 41 when he died, a man who built things with his hands. He'd bought the Larkspur building as a near wreck and spent 6 years rebuilding it, unit by unit, his knuckles perpetually scraped. The cabin he'd half built himself, a stubborn little place with a tin roof and a dock that leaned toward the water. We weren't wealthy. We were careful, and we were each other's. At the funeral, my family performed their grief beautifully. My mother wept in the front pew. Renata gripped my hand at the graveside and leaned close to whisper what I thought was comfort. That cabin belongs to this family, she murmured. Not just to her. I told myself grief had bent the words. Her mascara was untouched. Her eyes were dry. I know better now. She wasn't sad. She was rehearsing. People hear 3 rental units and a lake cabin and picture a lucky woman. Let me tell you what those things actually were. The Larkspur building was our retirement. Owen and I never had children, and somewhere in our Urdies we made peace with it and poured that love into work instead. The units brought in a little more than their own mortgage every month. That margin was the plan. It meant I wouldn't end up broke and alone the way half my patients had. Owen used to sit at our kitchen table on Sunday nights with a legal pad, mapping it out. "You're going to be safe," he'd say. "I don't care what else happens." The cabin was different. It's where he asked me to scatter him, not a cemetery, the dock, the water he'd taught me to swim in. So when I heard my mother hand that place to my sister's children like a spare key, something in me woke up. This wasn't money they were dividing. It was the last promise my husband ever made me, and they were splitting it over coffee before the casseroles went cold. I remember one more thing from those Sunday nights, months before he died. Owen, not looking up from the pad, "Whatever happens, don't let your mother's name touch any of this paperwork." She arrived at my house the next morning, before I'd even washed the funeral out of my hair, with a foil-covered dish and the tender expression she's used to talk me out of my own opinions since I was 6. "Oh, honey," she said, stepping past me into my kitchen. "Look at you, you're not sleeping. You can't carry all of this alone, the properties, the taxes, Owen's accounts." A day earlier, that speech might have worked. But I'd stood outside her kitchen and heard the other version, and now I could hear both at once, like a song played over its own echo. "Let me help manage things," she said, "just until you're yourself again." She set a small stack of papers on my counter face down, unhurried. "Nothing to do today." Then she kissed my forehead and left. I let the papers sit for a full day, because part of me still wanted my mother to be my mother. When I finally flipped the top page, the numbness cracked down the middle. It was a power of attorney, not a form for one errand, but a broad, durable one that would let her act on my behalf over money, property, everything. And the past 2 weeks rearranged themselves in my mind. Renata had come during Owen's final weeks with soup and dry eyes, offering to sit with him so you can sleep. I'd been so exhausted, so grateful that I let her. I'd seen her more than once in his home office, door half shut, and assumed she was giving me privacy. I understood now she'd been alone with his files, the will, the deeds, the account numbers. She hadn't come to help him die, she'd come to read. I sat on my kitchen floor, the power of attorney in my hand, and did the arithmetic on my own family. The papers were step 2. Renata's soup had been step 1. And whatever step 3 was, my mother had already assumed I'd sign my way straight into it, because I always cave. Here's the part I'm least proud of. There was already a power of attorney. I'd already signed one. 3 weeks before Owen died, when he needed pain medication on a strict schedule and I couldn't leave his side, my mother put a paper in front of me, a narrow one, she said, just so she could cover the hospice invoices and keep the utilities running. I asked her directly, "This is only for the bills, right?" And she looked at me, with Owen moaning through the wall, and said, "Honey, if I can't move money for you, the hospice stops coming Friday. Do you want to argue over wording, or do you want them here?" Friday, so I signed. You would have signed too. And here's what I didn't understand then, what it cost me nearly everything to learn. Signing one takes 30 seconds. Undoing one and undoing what's already been done with it takes lawyers and time and a fight. So I didn't sign the new one. I called my mother and said in my most tired voice that I couldn't think about paperwork yet, that I needed a couple of weeks. "Of course, honey," she said. "No rush." Then I hung up, stopped being tired, and went into Owen's office to read everything myself: bank statements, deeds, the mortgage on the Larkspur building. Owen kept it all in labeled folders, because Owen built everything square and level. That's where I found the first thing that didn't fit: a statement for a home equity line of credit tied to the Larkspur property. One I had never opened, never heard him mention. The balance wasn't zero. I sat under his desk lamp, holding proof that someone had been quietly borrowing against the roof over my future. I didn't let myself guess who. But I copied the account number onto the back of my hand in pen, the way you hold onto something you're afraid will vanish. The phone calls started that week, from 2 directions. Renata called nearly every day, warm and full of concern that always curved toward the same place. "Let the family manage the properties for you, just until you're back on your feet." She never said give. She said manage. My mother's calls were quieter and worse. I only learned about them secondhand. My friend Priya from the Ho Spice unit called, a little confused. "Your mom rang me. She was asking whether the grief was making you confused about things." My old neighbor said the same. My mother was moving through my life, gently, planting one small seed in each conversation, not that I was grieving, but whether I could be trusted with decisions. It was Priya who finally said the word out loud, though she hadn't meant to. Over coffee, she said, "Your mom asked me something odd. She asked what the process was if a person couldn't manage their own affairs anymore, what it takes. In my work, I've sat with families through exactly that question. There's a courtroom, a judge, a doctor's letter. At the end of it, a person can lose the right to sign their own name. My mother had been asking all over town how to take that from me. Not to help me, to run me. Suddenly, every piece snapped into a single line. The narrow power of attorney on my counter wasn't the plan, it was insurance. The real plan was to gather enough worried neighbors and a sympathetic story to walk into a courtroom and have a judge agree that the grieving widow couldn't be trusted and that her loving mother had better hold the reins. I drove home the long way, and somewhere on that road I stopped being frightened and started being something steadier and colder, because now I knew the shape of the thing. And a thing with a shape can be fought. I needed to breathe, so I drove up to the cabin, 2 hours north. I sat on the dock and told Owen what his family was doing. Walking back toward the cabin, our neighbor Hal Bowden crossed the grass and said the thing that turned the day sideways. "Say, that contractor fella, your sister's husband, he get everything he needed the other day. Saw him and another guy out here with tape measures." I kept my face still. "Oh right, thanks Hal," but my heart was slamming. Colton had been at my cabin, the place Owen's ashes were meant to go, walking the property with a tape measure while I was 2 hours south, burying him. Inside, the smell of lake damp cedar nearly buckled my knees. They hadn't waited for a signature or a judge, in their minds it was already theirs. I found the side door lock had been changed, bright brass where the old one had gone dull. On the kitchen table sat a folding ruler, paint chips, and a yellow legal pad in Colton's blocky handwriting. Flip potential. Comps. List spring. Numbers on what he thought the cabin would fetch at auction. I didn't tear it up. The old version of me would have. Instead, I photographed every page, the way my sister had photographed my husband's files, except I was documenting a crime and she'd been shopping. I set the pad back exactly where it had been. My mother believed her softest daughter would cave. Her softest daughter stood in a cabin with a stolen lock and started, very quietly, to build a case. Driving south in the dark, I kept hearing Owen's voice. Don't let her name touch the paper. He'd said versions of it more than once in his final year. I saw it differently now. He'd understood the shape of his own in-laws. And there was a name he'd repeated to me twice. Adele. If anything ever gets complicated, you call Adele. Adele Voss, it turned out, was the estate attorney who'd drawn up his will. A woman he'd used for years and never mentioned to my family, because Owen told my family nothing he didn't have to. Home in his office past midnight, I dug through the drawer that always sticks, looking for her card. I didn't find a card. I found something better and worse. A sealed envelope, my name in his careful hand. Just Maren. A letter from your dead husband is a door you can only open once. I almost opened it that night, but I knew myself well enough to want to read it clear-eyed, not at 1 in the morning with my hands shaking. I propped it against the lamp and forced myself to bed. In the morning, before I touched it, my phone rang. My mother, bright and managed. "Maren, honey, good news. The family's getting together Sunday. I thought we'd do it up at the cabin." At the cabin, my cabin, with its stolen lock and its legal pad. She wanted to host her family's future on the site of my husband's last wish, and wanted me there smiling so it would look like my idea. "That sounds nice, Mom," I said. My voice didn't shake. She hung up, pleased. Sunday wasn't a gathering. It was a stage, which meant I had until then to learn exactly what I was walking into. I opened the envelope at my kitchen table in the morning light because that's where Owen did his best thinking. His handwriting filled 2 pages, steady near the top, looser toward the bottom. "I've watched your mother your whole marriage to me," he wrote. "I know how she works. The day I'm gone, she'll use how good you are against you. And the part I've reread so many times, the paper's gone soft at the fold. If they ever put a paper in front of you, do not sign it, not one line. Call Adele first. Her number's in the tin." In the pantry, behind the flour, I made this strong. But paper only holds if you hold the pen. Don't let them borrow your hand. He had known down to the gesture. He'd spent some of his last clear strength trying to arm me for it. I found the tin behind the flour, Adele's card, a spare cabin key, a folded page of account numbers. He hadn't left me helpless. He'd left me a map. But a map isn't a rescue. The walking was still going to be mine. I could have called Adele that morning and let it all pour out. I didn't. I saw that I had exactly one advantage. They didn't know that I knew. If I started filing things and changing locks in a fury, they'd feel the ground shift, and my mother would move faster. The ugliest version of her plan, the courtroom, would arrive sooner and harder. So I decided to keep smiling. I'd go to the cabin Sunday and let them believe they were winning, listen, learn exactly what paper they meant to hand me, and give nothing away. Then quietly on my own schedule, I'd do the real work with Adele where they couldn't see it. It felt like swallowing glass. But I'd watched too many families at too many bedsides to confuse the satisfaction of saying a true thing with the result of protecting yourself. One is a feeling. The other is a plan. I chose the plan. Sunday was beautiful, which felt like an insult. They'd beaten me to the cabin, Colton's truck already there, smoke off the grill Owen had built, the kids throwing rocks off the leaning dock. My mother had brought tablecloths to my grief in my house. Partway through the afternoon, my mother slid a folder toward me with the tenderest smile in her arsenal. We had someone draw this up, a family agreement. It puts the properties into a shared arrangement so nobody has to carry it alone. Renata watched me the way a cat watches a door. I opened it, exactly what you'd guess, dressed in soft language, an instrument that would fold my properties into a trust they controlled and I did not. This is thoughtful, I said, keeping my voice mild. Let me read it properly before I sign anything. Owen always said never sign at the table. I closed the folder. For 1 second my mother's smile flickered before she smoothed it over. Of course, honey, no rush. Then Colton filled the silence. We already started pulling the cabin together, so once the paperwork's, and Renata said his name sharp and low, but it was too late. Every adult at that table heard the crack. My father found me on the porch afterward. Walter is 76, his heart failing, and he's spent 40 years letting my mother do the talking. Your mother says this fixes everything, he said, hands shaking. The bills and all, you know I've got the heart thing, the treatments. It's a lot of money, Maren. For a moment I saw the real thing underneath, an old, scared man who'd been told his daughter's inheritance was the answer to his fear. I felt sorry for him. Then he said the next thing, and it stopped my breath. Your mother already took care of some of it, the bank part. She said it was handled. The bank part? Handled. I kept my face turned toward the water. My mother had already done something at a bank, using a hand that wasn't hers, and told my dying father it was handled so he'd stop being afraid. Whatever guess I'd refused to voice in Owen's office, my own father had just confirmed the edge of it. Monday morning, I called Adele Voss. Before she could call me back, the mail did the talking. Tuesday, a thick envelope from the county probate court. Petition for emergency appointment of conservator, filed by Vivian Ashcroft. In the matter of Maren Ellison, an adult alleged to be unable to manage her own affairs. 28 days after I buried my husband, my mother had gone to a courthouse to take my life away and hand it to her fast, under an emergency provision, so it would be decided before I was steady enough to fight. Every soft phone call to every neighbor made sense now. She'd been assembling a witness list. The kindling had a fire. She believed the petition would find me broken. Instead, it found me at a kitchen table with my husband's letter in a drawer and an estate lawyer's card in my pocket. The clock was now real. 28 days, 12 left. Adele Voss had a low, unhurried voice. I told her everything in order. She was quiet a moment, then said, Owen told me a year ago this might happen. He set the estate up carefully for exactly this reason. You're in a far stronger position than your mother thinks, but we have to move in the right order. First, revoke the old power of attorney, properly served. Second, move the properties into the irrevocable trust Owen's plan already allowed for, so there'd be nothing loose for a conservator to seize. Third, build the answer to the petition, proof I was exactly as capable as I'd always been. And pull every statement on that credit line, she said. If she used the power of attorney to borrow against your property, that isn't a family squabble. That's financial exploitation. And it changes who the judge is worried about. That afternoon in Adele's office, I signed the papers that turned everything. I revoked the power of attorney and had it formally served, so there'd be a record, a date after which my mother had no more authority over my affairs than a stranger on the street. Then I funded the trust, and the 3 properties passed out of my sole name into an instrument no conservator could reach. When I walked out, I understood the fight was, in a legal sense, already over. My mother simply didn't know it yet. For the next 10 days, my family kept planning, arranging furniture in a house that no longer belonged to anyone they could push around. Renata kept calling about the family agreement. My mother kept collecting worried neighbors. Colton kept measuring the cabin. Every warm call from my sister was a woman bailing out a boat already on dry land. I'd hang up and think, very quietly, not this time. There is a specific power in knowing something the person across from you doesn't. My whole life, my mother had held that power over me. For 12 days, I held it over her, and she smiled through every second of it, certain she was winning. Keeping the mask on was the hardest work I've ever done. Renata came by with a coffee cake, told me how much easier things would be once the family arrangement was settled. She always caves, I thought, watching her cut me a slice I didn't want. I smiled, said I was thinking it over, and let her leave believing she'd nudged me an inch closer. The worst moment was the children. As Renata left, she called back to Lily, who is 11, "We'll be up at the cabin all summer, you can pick your room." My mother had sold these kids a future in my husband's cabin, and they were entirely innocent in it. I didn't correct it. It wasn't Lily's crime. But I went inside and pressed my back against the door and breathed until the anger went from hot to cold, because cold was useful and hot was not. Petition like my mother's doesn't just claim you're sad, it claims you can't function. To beat it, I had to prove capability on paper to a judge who'd never met me. I called Nora Prout, the hospice social worker who'd watched me chart medications to the milligram while my own husband was dying in the next room. "Send me the date," she said. "I'll tell that judge exactly who you are." Adele gathered the rest: my employment record, 9 unbroken years, my nursing license, my supervisor's letter. None of it was dramatic. That was the point. My mother's case was built on feeling. Mine was built on the flat, unglamorous record of a woman who'd kept showing up. 9 days out, my mother had stopped hiding her confidence. That's what certainty does to people like her, it makes them careless. She called midweek, brisk, and proprietary. "Once things are settled, you should start moving your things out of the cabin so Renata can get in there before the season. Then, don't you worry about the money side, honey. The bank part's all handled. I took care of that weeks ago." There it was again, said aloud, unguarded. A woman so certain of winning that she was narrating her own crime to the daughter she was robbing. "That was thoughtful of you, Mom," I said, and hung up, shaking with a clean, cold fury, because she'd just confirmed on a phone call exactly what I still needed to prove on paper. 2 days later, Hal Bowden called from the lake, careful the way country neighbors get when they're trying not to start a war. "There's a lockbox on your front door now, the kind realtors use. My wife found it listed online for sale come spring. Photos and everything. A lockbox, a listing. Photos of my husband's cabin, staged for strangers, while the petition still sat on a judge's desk. Colton had begun demolition on a house he didn't own, without a permit." Hal added, quiet. "Rosa printed the listing. Says family lake retreat, been in the family for years." Been in the family for years. My sister's exact words at the graveside, now printed in a real estate ad. I thanked Hal and told him to hold onto that printout like it was money, because it was. Then Adele called, an edge in her voice I hadn't heard before. "I pulled the bank records on that credit line. I found what your mother did with your husband's property, and exactly when she did it. Using the power of attorney I'd signed 3 weeks before Owen died, my mother had drawn tens of thousands against a home equity line secured by one of the Larkspur units. During the exact window, I was never more than a room away from a dying man. She'd taken my exhaustion and turned it into a loan against my future, before she ever filed to have me declared unable to manage that future." "She's going to argue you can't handle your own money," Adele said. "And the record shows that while your husband was on his deathbed, she used your signature to borrow against our property without your knowledge. Judges truly hate a fiduciary who robbed the person she claims to protect." I asked if we could prove it was her, not me. "The bank has signature cards, dates, and IP address. You were logged into a hospice charting system, 3 states of exhaustion deep on those days. Yes, we can prove it." 7 days out, there was one more thing I wanted before the hearing, not evidence, just to hear my sister say it. I invited Renata to lunch. Over salads, she talked about the summer, how nice things would be once everything was simple. My sister has never once resisted the chance to explain how clever she's been, and she told me more than she should have. Honestly, Mom handled most of it. She said we had to get everything lined up quick, before Owen's lawyer got involved, and made things complicated. Before Owen's lawyer got involved. She just confirmed over a Cobb salad that they'd raced to move on my property specifically to beat the attorney my husband had put in place to protect me. She caught something in my face and narrowed her eyes. "You're being weird. You okay?" I put the soft face back on, said I was just tired, that I'd probably sign the family agreement that week. Her whole body relaxed. She squeezed my hand, the same hand she'd gripped at Owen's grave. "You're doing the right thing." I have never so badly wanted to say a true thing, and so completely known that silence was worth more. 5 days out, Adele assembled the answer to the petition. The revocation, dated and served, the trust documents, my employment record and license, Nora's sworn statement, and on top like a stone, the bank records showing exactly what my mother had borrowed and when. Her plan was quiet and merciless. Let my mother build her whole case, then hand the judge the truth, one page at a time, and let it fall. "Don't argue with her in there," Adele told me. "Don't raise your voice. If you stay quiet and factual while she performs, the contrast will do more than any speech." I asked if I could be the one to hand the judge the bank records myself. She nodded. "Yes, you hold the pen, that's the whole point." The night before the hearing, I didn't rehearse a speech because I wasn't going to give one. I laid out plain, dark clothes. I read Owen's letter one more time, "Don't let them borrow your hand," and put it in my bag, just so he'd be in the room. I understood something that night I want to leave with you before the courtroom. My mother had spent my entire life mistaking my quiet for weakness. The softness, the patience, the way I lower my voice when everyone else is raising theirs. She read all of it as caving. She never once considered that a woman who stays calm while she's being robbed might be calm because she's counting. The hearing was in a small courtroom on the third floor, bad light, good acoustics. My mother arrived in charcoal gray, my father on her arm, Renata behind them, 3 neighbors dressed for church. When she caught my eye, she gave me a look I'll never forget. Tender, pitying. The look you give someone you're about to do a great kindness for. Her attorney told the story they'd built. That grief had left me unable to cope, that family and neighbors were deeply concerned, that a temporary conservatorship with my devoted mother at the helm was the compassionate solution. His witnesses stood and said true, sad things about a woman at her lowest. Every word was accurate. Every word was a month old. I sat still, hands folded, and watched my mother dab her eyes at all the right moments. The judge turned to my side. "Is she represented?" Adele stood, calm as still water. "Before my client speaks, we'd like to submit some documents relevant to the petitioner's fitness to serve as anyone's conservator." She laid it out. That 3 weeks before Owen died, while I provided round-the-clock care, my mother presented a power of attorney represented as necessary only for hospice invoices, and used it, without my knowledge, to draw a home equity line against my property for tens of thousands of dollars while my husband was still alive in the next room. I watched my mother's face as Adele read the date aloud, the exact day I'd been at Owen's bedside, timing his medication, trusting her to keep the lights on. That was the cut that went all the way down. The neighbors had gone very quiet. My father was staring at my mother. Her tender, pitying face began, slowly, to come apart. Dell kept going, no heat in her voice at all. The revocation, dated and served. The trust documents, showing the properties already beyond any conservator's reach. The petition is aimed at property that is already protected. My employment record, my license, my supervisor's letter. Nora Prude on the stand, saying steadily that she'd watched me hold grieving families together at 3 a.m. through the very weeks my mother now claimed I'd lost my mind. And last, the real estate listing, post. While the petition was pending, describing my cabin as a family lake retreat, been in the family for years. The judge read it slowly, then looked up, not at me, at my mother. That was when Vivian Ashcroft stopped performing grief and started to panic. She came up out of her chair. "This is not what it looks like. I did all of this to protect her. She has never been able to take care of herself." Her attorney reached for her arm. She shook him off, turned to me, face wet now with fury instead of grief. "After everything I've done for you, you would do this to your own mother, in front of people." The judge said, "Ma'am," sharply. My mother didn't hear it. She was waiting for me to crumble, because that's what I'd always done, what she'd told Renata I would do at the very start. She always caves. I didn't raise my voice. I had a month of it stored up, but the entire point was that I didn't need to. "I'm a hospice nurse," I said quietly, and the room stilled to hear me. "I've held steady hands through the worst nights people ever have. I think I can hold my own." Then gently, almost kindly, which is what made it land, You told Renata I'd sign whatever you put in front of me, that I always cave. You were right once. I didn't fold this time. I just stopped telling you my plans." The room was so quiet I could hear the radiator tick. My mother sat down like her strings had been cut, and the judge asked her clerk how quickly the court could take up the question of the funds the petitioner had removed. The petition didn't just fail, it turned over and showed its belly. The judge denied the emergency conservatorship from the bench, noting the respondent had demonstrated more than sufficient capacity and that the petition appeared aimed less at protecting me than at reaching property already placed beyond reach. Then she went after the rest. Renata tried to explain the listing. They'd only listed it to be ready, but her own words at lunch, the race to move before Owen's lawyer got involved, made clear what share had meant. Colton had torn out a kitchen and listed a property with no legal claim to it. Adele made sure the court understood that was his liability to answer for, along with whatever the county had to say about unpermitted work. I didn't gloat. I watched my sister understand in real time that the summer at the lake, the room Lily was going to pick, was gone because they'd reached for something that was never theirs. My mother's reckoning was larger. She lost the two things she'd spent her life protecting, her money and her mask. The judge referred the credit line for review as possible financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. She would have to pay back every dollar she'd borrowed using my exhausted signature. But the money was never the real loss. The real loss was the room. Her carefully gathered neighbors had come believing they were helping a devoted mother rescue a broken daughter, and watched the story turn inside out in front of them. They filed out without meeting her eyes. She did not apologize. She tried one more version instead, that I'd humiliated her, that I'd regret it when she was gone. Blame, then self-pity, then a threat wearing the costume of grief. I said, "I revoked your access to everything this morning, Mom, all of it," and walked past her to find my father. He was sitting alone on a hallway bench, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. When he saw me, he tried to stand and couldn't, so I sat beside him instead. "I didn't know about the bank," he said, not looking at me. "She told me it was handled and I didn't ask." I believed him mostly. He'd let it happen by not asking, its own kind of failure, but he was 76 and dying by inches, steered his whole life by a woman who steered everyone, and I found no cruelty left in me for him. "Your treatments," I said. "How much, really?" he told me, ashamed. I told him I'd take care of it directly, on my own terms, and he'd never have to ask my mother for anything again. He cried the loose, helpless crying of the very old and gripped my hand, and I let him. That's not weakness. I could afford to be kind because I'd already made myself safe. Owen taught me that, get strong first, then you get to be gentle. There was one more thing to get right, nothing to do with courtrooms. Lily and Jonah had spent weeks being told they were getting a cabin, a summer, and none of that was their doing. A few days later, I called Lily myself. I told her the truth, the child-sized version, that the cabin had belonged to her Uncle Owen and now belonged to me, and the grown-ups had fought about it in a way that wasn't her fault. Then I told her the cabin would always be a place she could come, invited by me, any summer she liked, not because anyone had taken it, but because I wanted to share it. "Even Jonah?" she asked. "Even Jonah," I said. My mother had handed those kids something that wasn't hers to give, to buy their loyalty and cover her theft. I offered them something that was mine, freely, because they were innocent, and I wasn't going to punish the innocent to punish the guilty. The months after were quieter than you'd think. My mother repaid what she'd taken through lawyers, and we haven't spoken since except that way. Renata and Colton untangled themselves from the cabin mess slowly and expensively. I had the locks changed back to real ones and kept the only keys. The Larkspur building still pays a little more than its own mortgage, the way Owen planned. I'm still going to be safe. I pay for my father's treatments directly and visit him when my mother is out. In June, I drove up to the cabin alone and took Owen out to the end of the leaning dock in the little tin his ashes came in, and let the lake have him exactly where he'd asked. I didn't fall apart. I stood on the dock he built and told him it was done, that no one had taken what he'd left me, that I had held the pen. Lily and Jonah came up in July and threw rocks off that same dock, and for the first time the place felt like ours again instead of evidence. I think that's the part my mother never understood. She thought the properties were the prize. They were never the prize. The prize was being a woman no one could move against, standing on her own dock, in her own life, giving what she chose to give. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, being gentle was never the same as being easy to take from. The day I stopped explaining that to people who already knew, it was the day they lost. That's my story, a door I never walked through, a signature they counted on, a quiet they mistook for weakness. If this reminded you to check who holds power of attorney over your life, or to read every line before you sign anything a smiling relative slides across a table, do it this week. Don't wait for a funeral to find out. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.